Let us play. We're in a cycle of looking at the myths of Plato. The conclusion to Plato's Republic is a myth, as he does in other dialogues. The Phaedo, which we just went through, that's also a concluding myth, concluding in the dialogue. And here we have the myth of concludes Plato's Republic. Now, it's a rather curious myth. And we're going to see whether we can play with it, make sense of it. So then, let's start. Myth is telling us something significant. We have to discover its significance. It takes a reflection. It takes an examination. Now first, who's was a warrior. And he fought, and of course he was wounded on the battlefield, and he was left for dead. 10 days after the battle, they collected the decaying corpses and put them on a pyre to burn them. And much to people who were collecting them surprise, Ur's body was still intact. They were going to burn it on the 12th day, and there he woke up. He arose on the funeral pyre on the 12th day, and he said, "Excuse me, don't use a match." And he related this myth. Myth is therefore an account of the other world, because his soul left his body during that period of time, and he traveled into the next world, and this is the myth. So after 10 days, nice point up there. I'll talk about it in a minute, even though it's hidden. After 10 days then, they collected the bodies, they put them on the funeral pile on the 12th. He stopped the burning, got off, and said, "I have been told to give ear and to observe everything, because I just visited the other world, and I've been told to come and return to give mankind the account of the next world." That's the myth of First thing he says is that after death, people come together to be judged. And there's two openings in the heaven, and 2 openings going down below to Hades. They come before these judges, and there are 4 things, of course, that go on here. First, those that are just go up into the heavens. The unjust go down. Equally well, coming back, those that have been clean and pure return now to be reincarnated. And so they return to the next world, our world. Equally well, coming up from Hades are those who have lived in squalor and suffering, and they're covered with dirt, and they enter into this arena to be judged once more. And this is the judgment. The whole myth is about the judgment. Now, for those people who are clean and pure and coming down to be reincarnated, and those coming up who've paid their penalties up from the other world, they come together and they have discussions and they reflect upon their experiences. This is called the journey to the meadow, and they stay there for several days, and they discuss with one another, and they talk about people they knew and what's happened to them. And so they give all kinds of accounts of their journeys, both from heaven and from Hades. They have a great exchange. The ones from heaven talk about the visions of beauty and the delights they experienced. The others talk about the wailing and the suffering, and they lament over everything they went through, but now they're together and they're reflecting on this. The first thing they bring up is the judgment that took place. For each and every wrong, there's a 10-fold penalty of 100 years. For each kindness and act of being just, the same measure is given for those going into the higher world, the heavens. And so that's the way in which the judgment is decided. 10 times same measure for each wrong, 10 times the measure for each act of kindness and being just, and that accounts for your journey in both of those places. Next step. But some people wanting to come up, the unjust, if they haven't paid their penalty, then this opening turns into a deadly mouth. And as they approach it, it closes. And since they haven't paid their penalty, a certain number of very strong things come along and hurl them down into Tartarus until they finish their penalty. So especially the incurable, when they're seen, then they're pushed down into Tartarus, which is that conic section that runs all the way down into Hades and heaven. So they go down and descend into the deepest part of Tartarus. And equally well, those that lived a good life, of course, it's opened up and it smiles and it allows access into that great meadow. In the meadow then they spend 7 days, each group is there for that period of time, and on the 8th they rise and they make a journey, 4 days journeying now, to a shaft of light, pure light, brilliant. And it runs through the entire universe. So this now is going to run through everything, all the heavens, everything, this shaft of pure light. From its extremities, there is something else that takes place. It's called the light. The most central part of it is called the light of the girdle of the heavens. It really holds everything together. It holds the universe together. It is the basic construction of the triremes, the great battleships in those days built by the Greeks. It's that central piece that's put in there which everything joins to it. Now this thing runs through it, of course. Now that's really interesting. The name is the spindle of necessity. Now I like this word because this is going to play a major role. Necessity, fated necessity. Because we have to see how much of this is really mechanical. Now, around this, of course, the spindle of necessity, are the orbits of the planets. And he gives a description of each one of the planets and the relative distances from each one, and the way in which it moves creates this curious feature which he talks about as a series of boxes that you can put one into another, much like those Russian dolls. That's it. That's the way it is. And through the whole thing is this most brilliant of all lights, which then fixes everything together, and so it rotates, it revolves. Now, what turns it around? What turns it around? Well, first the whirl. The whole thing turns, spins, and their colors, and their magnificent colors, and it turns the whole thing. The spindle is turned on the knees of necessity. All right, so we have to have necessity in here. And with my art, we won't have any trouble at all. All right? So here's necessity. And there you can see are her knees. All right? And the spindle, therefore, right, the spindle is turned. The spindle is turned on the knees of necessity. Each one of those rims, of course, I should have mentioned it before, but above the rims there's a siren that sits and sings one note, one beautiful note, as the whole thing spins around and around and around.
Does this take the place of the sun then?